I'm going to talk to you today about threat mitigation. Before I talk to you about threat mitigation and what it is, probably should introduce myself. So my name is Callum. I'm currently the head of SOC at SenseOn. Prior to SenseOn, I worked at the Cooperative Group as a SOC lead there. Before that, I worked at the BBC, just over the way. I'm probably the guy, in terms of like context for this talk, I'm the person who is responsible for calling you at 3 in the morning when something bad is happening in your environment, telling you something's bad happened, and hopefully telling you that it's fine even though things are burning and you should still be concerned. In terms of what we're going to be talking about today, threat mitigation, so I'm going to give you the overview, background and context. This is the boring bit in my view, but we need to get it on so we're all on the same page. Then we're going to go into some stories from my team, so what my team have been doing in the last 6 months, a few interesting stories, and hopefully give you guys some takeaways that you can implement in your own SOCs or with your managed SOCs if you pay someone to do it for you, like me. And then finally, by the end of this, hopefully you'll be able to assess performance of your managed SOCs or SOCs internally and how they deal with incidents and how well they deal with incidents. So that's the ideal. There's some technical controls that you can take away, maybe implement to save your SOCs waking up at 3 in the morning, harden your environments if you can, but that's what we're going to go with. Cool. This button is really quick. So hopefully you're going to turn away from this. So everything's burning around you and the threat actors are stealing your data to something more like that. That's a really dramatized view of what actually happens in the real world, but yeah. Cool, okay, so what is threat mitigation? You guys have all heard of incident response, I'm hoping. Threat mitigation is like a subset of incident response. Effectively, when we use that term, we're trying to talk about the context of evicting a threat actor in the moment, not dealing with the whole incident. So we're just disrupting, containing in that particular instance. We're not kicking the threat actor out. We're kicking the threat actor entirely, but we're not resolving all the damage that they've caused. We're not remediating in its entirety, right? So I'm going to talk to you, I'll give you the high-level definition. I've just talked you through it there. A bit about how we measure performance. I think this is really important that we understand how we measure performance because, is your team doing well? What's the industry look like? Do you know? Hopefully there are some nods in there, but maybe you don't. And then lastly, I've got some real-world data that I can share with you, but most of it had to be anonymized because it's all through my contacts. So, yeah. Awesome. There's a definition if you want to read it. I don't. Why do we care about it? Firstly, the industry talks a lot about threat mitigation. There's loads of reading, some good blog posts there if you want to have a look. But effectively, the industry cares about it because it helps us determine how well we're doing as an industry when we're dealing with threat actors. It tells us that as an industry, we should agree on being as effective as possible and doing things really quickly. Everyone agrees on that, makes sense, but no one really tells you what that looks like, what is quick, do you know? Or do you agree on that even between organizations? Maybe, maybe not. And then lastly, it always says that as an industry, we should always improve on what we're doing. But improving if we're really slow is obviously very easy. When we hit those upper bounds, how do we improve? The only person or company I could find with some actual stats that they've put was CrowdStrike. No hate on CrowdStrike, they're a great company. But yeah, they were able to put some numbers to a stat in this one quote, which is like a minute to detect a threat. How many of you guys detect a threat in a minute? And 10 minutes to understand it. Does your team understand a threat in 10 minutes? Maybe, maybe not. And then an hour to contain it. Why is it taking 50 minutes if you understand it to contain a threat? What's going on? Where are these numbers coming from? We'll dig into that a little bit. This button is really tactile. Cool, so mean time to acknowledge. I'm going to talk to you about 3 metrics for performance that you should measure. These are high level. They're really abstract. I've made them as easy as possible for you to implement because if you're a mature organization, if you're thinking in this talk so far, I know how long it takes my team. We can remediate. We're a good team. You can advance on these metrics. These are like the base level that you should hopefully be tracking against. So mean time to acknowledge, how fast do you look at it? CrowdStrike earlier, a minute to detect. Is that acknowledging or is that the detection's firing? We'll find out. But yeah, why is this important for you to actually measure and understand? Firstly, attackers generally, as a trend, are moving faster. So when they get initial access on a device, they're faster at taking that access, pivoting, and laterally moving, stealing your data. So if you're really slow to look at something, they're probably going to achieve a lot of their objectives before you've achieved it, or before you spotted them doing it, sorry. Secondly, if you're tracking these numbers over time, you might spot issues with your provider. So for example, month A, they were really quick in January, and then February, they've suddenly slowed down a lot. What happened? oh, I checked on LinkedIn and 3 of their analysts have got hired by different people. Suddenly, they've got a capacity issue and now they're really slow at doing their job. Or internally, you can see that as well, and you can use it to hopefully speak to your manager and say, hey, we need to get people in real quick. And yeah, it can also help you show burnout, right? Lastly, it might show your analysts aren't prioritizing things that they want, or that you necessarily want. So they might not be looking at cases, but they might be busy writing that really cool threat hunting query to look for some niche APT group that probably isn't targeting your organization. But if they are, at least you have it written, right? Cool, second measurement for performance then, the mean time to investigate. If you're a more mature organization, this is probably where you'll start to delineate from what I'm talking about. So you'll split this out between your investigation time, so time to understand, versus time to respond. I'm just going to lump that together in this talk to make it faster and easier for us all. But effectively, yeah, how long does it take you to understand what's going on, kick the people out, and be happy, and start actually containing your incident? Why? There's loads of good reasons for why. Hopefully you can read some of those yourself. But effectively, the key ones for me are it gives you an understanding of how quickly you're able to do your job from a SOC perspective, right? If you're taking 3 hours to do this, threat actors are moving real quick these days. 3 hours is probably too long. You're going to be looking at their initial compromised machine while they're on the domain controllers having fun. Probably not the best idea. And it allows you to ask them more in-depth questions like, is my team skilled up? Are they able to understand what's happening in the time I'm giving them for the incidents that they have, the workload that they've got going on? Hopefully they're not as harebrained and crazy as my guy up there. And then lastly, time to resolve. This is very simple. How long does it take you to finish up and close everything from start to end, right? That's your final time. Get your flex tape on and solve your problem. Like I said, incident response as a whole is not pretty. Threat mitigation in particular is you are literally putting a plaster on something and fixing it later. Cool, so ultimately, just to recap, 3 measurements: mean time to acknowledge, investigate, respond. One key distinction I would like to make on this is when you're measuring these, don't include your SOR activity, no orchestration, automation, or response activity. Anything automated, log it separately in your time, because realistically, you need to understand how your humans are performing and your automations, and take the worst case for you, which is your humans, because they're slower than your automations. If you're mixing these 2 numbers together and something breaks in your automation, or you can't, the person who wrote that automation has left, that script doesn't work anymore for whatever reason, the credentials are broken, you're going to be in trouble because all of your incident response stats that you said you're able to deal with an incident in this time frame aren't going to work. But yeah, trifecta. Cool. Real-world performance then. So I touched on the fact that it's really hard to find data to compare yourselves against. How is your MSP performing? How is your SOC performing? So I asked my contacts. I could only share anonymized data with you, unfortunately, but I've got some anyway to help out, and I can share my own. So I've got 3 companies here and my own company. At SenseOn, not my company, but the company I work for, sorry. And yeah, got the Finance Pro over on the left, company A, 30,000 endpoints, big organization, reasonably large. Just remember them, cash money, lots of it. They have a managed SOC who helps them out. Got company B, they're a manufacturing organization. If any of you play Team Fortress 2, they're an engineer, I've put them as. And then I kind of ran out of icons for the healthcare and SenseOn. I can't joke about SenseOn because I am employed by them, so I will suffer the consequences. But remember those icons, they're the companies you're looking at. So I've got large, kind of medium, small, in-house, and then SenseOn, which is, we have loads of different customers of varying sizes, so all over the shop, whoever you want. I'm going to pause here and just let you look at this graph for a second, but this is those companies, their stats graphed out at a bar chart. So effectively, mean time to acknowledge is blue, red is mean time to investigate, and yellow is mean time to respond, or to resolve, sorry. So how long is it taking them to do whatever they're doing? I just want you to look at that and kind of think about, if you're in these companies, is that realistic for you? What are some of the problems that come from those numbers? Are there issues that you think, actually, this investigation time is unrealistic? Are these stats correct? They're correct to the best of the ability that people have provided the information with, but we can get into some problems. So hopefully, with looking at it, and this button clicks, you might see some things that are interesting. For me personally, I think the mean time to resolve, so this yellow number, this yellow bar, sorry, this number, is reasonably close together. If you look at the other stats, some of them are quite far apart. That's interesting, but there's a reason why, in this case, SenseOn, Company A and Company B all have managed SOCs. Well, I run the managed SOC for SenseOn. And they all have an SLA, so a service level agreement, to resolve within an hour for the customers. So there's an incentive, commercially speaking, to close off incidents in that hour. And if they don't do it, they'll get punished if they break it that enough times, right? So that clustering kind of makes sense as to why they're doing that. But then the interesting stuff is there's really big variance between company A and company B in terms of how long it's taken to acknowledge and investigate something. And these are both managed service providers. So these are both people that you're paying to do your job. Why is that variance so long? They're security professionals. Like, time to investigate, generally speaking, should be an average. Like, as professionals, no one's, like a 10x engineer that's really good. There are some people who are like insanely good, right? But on average, that number should be across the board reasonably similar. And it's quite different, especially in company A and company B. And there could be a load of different reasons for that. Obviously, I'm not in those companies, so I can't tell you what the problems are for the MSPs behind them. But some possible answers, like they've got SLAs around acknowledgement time. So company B, they acknowledge really quickly, but then they leave it because they've got loads of other work to do. So their investigation time isn't actually the true investigation time. It's just they picked it up. 30 minutes later, they look at it, and it takes them 10 minutes to actually understand what's going on, and they close it, right? And then company A, for example, could be the inverse. Like, they don't have any SLA on acknowledgement time, but potentially they have to investigate and understand what's going on in a certain time frame. Or just because they have to reach, they're going to hit SLA, they need to just go, yep, I know what's happened, let me close it off, right? Maybe it highlights some issues for you. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the kind of stories and examples, and think about, like, if this is your team, firstly, do you have these measurements in place? If you don't, maybe start tracking them. And if you do, like, will you respond in time to the threat actors that we're going to look at today? Cool. How am I doing for time? I think I'm all right. Yeah, cool. Okay, so first story then. There's two stories I'm going to talk you through today. The first one, just get domain admin. If you are an organization that hasn't done much security hardening, you might find some similarities with this group. Effectively, this threat actor was able to get domain admin straight from a laptop in about an hour of hands-on time, so very quick to pivot to the domain controllers. So what does this look like? Firstly, this customer, who are they? They're a construction company. They make a fair bit of money. Yeah, I ran out of memes for these people, so you're just going to get basic images now, okay? But yeah, they're a construction company. They've got reasonably small coverage in terms of endpoints. They've got 500 endpoints-ish. I think the estate's like 700, but they can't deploy to a few bits and bobs here and there. They have Defender, they have SenseOn, and they've got one security analyst in their team who's not even full-time. So security is not on their priority list. They're building buildings. Fair enough. What was the malware that we came across here? So in this case, it was Gootkit or Bootloader. Very, very active these days. I'm sure some of you will have come across them. Effectively, Bootloader is a Windows infector. It's a first stage kind of piece of malware that attackers will get users to install because they fall for SEO poisoning. It does some cool stuff. It's been used in espionage, ransomware, anything interesting for threat actors. You name it, they've done it. There's a blog post if you want to read more. What is SEO poisoning? How do they get in? SEO poisoning is actually a really cool technique. Effectively, the threat actors will either compromise existing websites and host content that they think you'll search for as users of your job, or they'll make their own websites and optimize those websites so they search highly in Google and rank. If they're lazy, they'll pay for adverts and do it instead, but one of the three. And they'll make it really keyword specific. So in this case, this company was compromised because they were searching for like some local government act about building. So they know that some users in the construction industry are going to try and search for this at some point in time. They'll click on that link, and they'll download a zip file, hopefully with some PDF documents, but also contains some malicious files that execute, in this case, a JavaScript file. And once that's done, they move really quickly. So this is a timeline. I'm going to kind of let you read some of it. But basically, if we look, this device over here doesn't have the SenseOn agent, so there's no detection activity because you can't see what's going on. But there's a case raised about some network scanning, so they're doing some enumeration, great. But when we actually pick it up is on day 2. So they spend about an hour on patient 0, getting some interesting data, doing some enumeration, grabbing an NTLM hash that they can crack offline for a week domain admin account. And then they come back the next morning, have a little sleep. Oh, they've cracked the password, very weak password, 8 characters long, and they pivot straight to the domain controller. So at 14 minutes past 8, you raise your first case. Your analysts are looking at it. That's where you need to think about, okay, 14 minutes past 8 is when the time of the case was raised. How long is it taking you as a team to acknowledge that? How long is it going to take you to investigate the behavior they've done? They're on a domain controller right now, so if you take too long, you're probably going to get ransomware pretty quick. So yeah, that's why those numbers are really important. Thankfully, in this case, we're able to kind of contain and isolate in about just under an hour or so across the board for the domain controller and evict the threat actor from these user environments, which is nice. Thankfully, quick for domain controllers, because if we're slow on domain controllers, we're in a bad state. But this is to highlight kind of when you've acknowledged it as an analyst. In this particular instance, there's like 11 unique detections that are raised. Now, there's a sample there that you can read if you want to, if you're technical, but basically the highlight here is that when you're looking at your time to investigate, will your analyst be able to read this information, extract the useful bits from it, and go through these 11 pieces to understand exactly what's happened and make the right decisions? Maybe, maybe not. Will they just isolate the domain controller, forget about patient 0 because they'll actually move to it, and then you've just left a threat actor in your environment who knows you're onto them, but still has domain admin credentials and can pivot somewhere else instead? Maybe. Yeah, that's why kind of making the right decision, giving your team the time to investigate and understanding these numbers is crucial. Cool. Key takeaways, I won't summarize too much, but yeah, basically make sure you're monitoring these metrics, you have the time and the capacity to actually investigate these things effectively. If you don't, you will fall foul of a threat actor achieving their goals and you'll be just behind, or no one cares if you cross the line, but it's 10 minutes late and you're already getting ransomware across your estate, right? Very difficult to stop. I didn't mention it there, but briefly, one key thing here is that my team couldn't get hold of the customer. Now, depending on like customer relationships with your managed service provider, you might give them carte blanche. You might say, do whatever you need to do, fix the problem, I don't care. Some customers, larger enterprise customers, generally say, tell me about it if it's a tier 0 asset, something critical. It makes me money, it's a domain controller like this one. In this case, the customer said to us, you need to get in touch. They didn't pick up the phone, so we made the judgment call for them. You need to have people in your team who are willing to make that judgment call. They have the confidence in doing that, and they have the support from you as senior leadership, or your senior leadership if you're not in that position. Sorry, going back. And yeah, you need to have the right skills to actually detect this stuff and make sure you know what's going on. Technical takeaways, you can read those, but yeah, like remove short paths to domain admin, run something like Bloodhound, Ping Castle, Azure Hound, Sharp Hound, any of those, like get those tools out there, remove some of the levels of weakness you've got in your environment, and do some basic hardening. Cool. And then number 2, I'm just gonna get some water. Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is obviously well known. Everyone knows Cobalt Strike, but we'll go into it. This is a large organization in healthcare, 10,000 endpoints, reasonably big. They have McAfee, SenseOn, they've got a SIEM in there. They've got loads of security analysts, but their tools aren't maybe as good as they want, or their SIEM is maybe not configured as they like, so it's all over the place. But they make a lot of money. Cobalt Strike, I'll let you read what that is real quick and just take a drink. Good on time, cool. So Cobalt Strike, adversary simulation, what does that mean? It means blue team has built it, well, red team has built it to help them, red team. But at some point in time, some crazy Russians got a hold of it, cracked it as software, and then leaked it so they can abuse it themselves, which is great for us because it's a really good tool, and you can, if you know what you're doing with it, you can be very quiet. And threat actors are getting better at using it. If it's used maliciously and it's not a pen tester, yeah, any purpose, any goal, really, ransomware or anything else they like. There's some really good DFR report resources for Cobalt Strike if you want to kind of have a dig into that. Again, timeline, I've got a bit more technical stuff, so you can look at like the case in a bit more detail here. But timeline-wise, patient gets infected. Kind of 10 minutes later, you get a priority case for them doing some funky stuff. And they do loads of enumeration. They try to laterally move, I think within here in like 40 minutes, they're trying to pivot from patient 0. So if you're slow, you will suffer the consequences. And if you're not making the right calls, you will suffer the consequences. But yeah, again, within an hour, you need to be realistically trying to contain or take action to remediate the threats in your environment. So that hour, even though there are SLAs behind it, there's a reason for those SLAs. It does make sense to some degree. But threat actors are moving faster, and especially if you haven't done the hardening, like that first company I touched on, if the threat actor didn't go to sleep, they would have cracked that password in a few hours at most. It was really weak, and they could have done a lot more damage had they been a little bit faster on their feet. So realistically, you need to be faster than that hour, and you need to understand, like, are you able to perform within that time frame? Cool. So what does this actually look like? So I touched on previously some of those observations, like there's 11 things. Like, what are you actually looking at when you're looking at these observations? I'm telling you about something, but how many of you will spot the unusual activity that's going on in these images? Like, when you look at this, do you go, okay, cool, Command Explorer launching command prompt with a D drive randomly named numbered file path and a command executable? Does that trigger to you as like, hey, that's weird? Why is that? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Why are we pinging our local host? Why are we launching an executable from the public directory? Do we know that the public directory is not commonly used for executables? Like, do your analysts know that? Like, if they don't, I use this as an interview test when I hire analysts. It's great. I have 4 images that I run through as a test, and it really shows you the people who understand like process relationships, what's going on, and can make the right decisions. And will your analysts pick up like process hollowing, like process injection? Maybe, maybe not. Again, in here, like, who am I? Yeah, could be used legitimately or not, but Windows Error Manager is the parent process. Why is that launching who am I? Will your analysts pick up on that? Maybe, maybe not. These are the sorts of things that you need to test your team on, so when they're investigating, you are confident that they will come to the right conclusion. If they don't, yeah, I've had people look at this and go, yeah, they're just, if they're an admin, then it's fine. And it's like, well, probably not. And yeah, bringing their own tools in, putting Active Directory find on this patient zero device, enumerating Active Directory, checking the default security products, all this stuff. I've had hundreds of candidates look at this and go, not a problem. So really, like, you might have a great team, but make sure they're aware of the latest techniques and tactics that you can use by threat actors and understand what's going on, because otherwise you'll have really good metrics, but you'll still get popped. One thing that helps from like a managed service perspective is obviously they see a lot more incidents than you might do as an in-house SOC. So if you have an in-house SOC, I'd recommend running like trial exercise of this, or if you have red teams or purple teams in, like getting them that exposure, because it's a bit harder. But when you're a managed SOC, you see stuff like this pretty damn often, unfortunately, but you have a lot more exposure to it, right? Cool. Let me move on. So key takeaways then, again, understand how you're performing, how you compare. Understand what your assets are doing, give your team clear guidance on what they can do for these assets, like workstations, laptops, do you care? Your C-suite, is there a different response that you need to have for them? Domain controllers, I don't know, if you're a finance company, you're checking processing servers, like all of these probably need slightly different understanding and nuance that your analyst or your managed service might not have. So really setting these boundaries out early is crucial. And then, yeah, making sure your team have the skills to understand what's going on, right? Give them some training, give them some practice, test them on it after the fact. When you get a red team in, ask them, hey, can you try these techniques that I saw in this report? Like, it's worth doing. And then lastly, like technical controls. In this case, this customer was using a USB stick that had Cobalt Strike on it because they were doing some very funky stuff. Maybe get some controls in place about USB usage. Maybe look for getting your detections checked for like unusual parent-child relationships, for process hollowing, that sort of stuff. And then get your vendors to test you. So if you're bringing in a red team, or if you have an MSP, don't tell them about it. I get hundreds of pen tests that happen for our customers that they don't tell us about it. And hopefully you're picking up, your MSP is picking those up. And if they're not, hopefully there's a good reason why, like, oh, the device you're using doesn't have whatever software that they have on it, right? If they're missing it, like, and they can give you good reason, I'd work with them. I wouldn't just bin them off. But if there's like clearly a gap in performance, then you need to start reconsidering what's going on. Awesome. And then summarize. So as a recap, measuring your performance is really crucial. If you don't measure, you won't know kind of how well you're performing against the wider industry. I do think as a subset of work, we actually need to be a lot better at publishing our numbers, like how I did earlier, like in terms of what those anonymized data sets look like. Even if that's anonymized, maybe we should spin up a project on that in the future and get companies to submit those stats, because I think in isolation, unless you're speaking to people in your own networks, you won't know kind of what their performance is or how you do in comparison. Yeah, make sure you keep on top of the real world. Have a look at places like DFIR report, where there are these reports that highlight attacks that have happened in the real world, and benchmark yourselves against those, put yourself in those shoes. Do I have controls that would stop it happening in the first place? If it did still happen, can my team pick it up? Can they understand what's happening? Like, will they make the right decision at the right time? Will the tools that I have work and do the job? All of these are the things that you should look at. And then finally, like, empower your team as well. So there's the countless times I've seen an incident where an analyst is like, yeah, there's definitely something bad happening, but I don't want to make the decision to stop it. I'm not in the position to stop it. Then they're perfectly right. They might be 2 years into a job or something. They might not have the confidence to do that decision. But if they're working at 3 a.m. and they can't get a hold of anyone else, someone needs to stop it. So at least if your team's not empowered, at least set them out like a clear process flow and some break glass kind of scenarios, so that they have the confidence and they can say, hey, it was written down here somewhere that I can make the right decision. And yeah, to recap, these 3 metrics, at a minimum, you can expand on these. You can go really granular on these. If you read the research, there's loads of different acronyms out there. Some of them overlap. Like there's like 3 different MTDRs. There's like resolve, remediate, run away. I don't know, I can't remember the last one. So yeah, take your time to have a look at that reading and really digest it. And then, yeah, get your measurements in. Understand what's going on in your environment. Awesome. I think I'm bang on time. That's everything I wanted to run through today. Any questions? Go for it.
With the company examples that you gave, were all of them 24/7 SOC?
Yeah, so the in-house company C, they are on call. They have 3 FTEs, and then they run an on-call. But the rest of them are all 24/7, yes. Front, and then I'll come to the middle.
Do you have any stats on the threats you mitigated, say, in the past year, and then some of the common types of threats you see?
Yes, so threats mitigated in terms of like priority incidents, so P1s, I'd say last year I think we had about 17 P1s across our customer base, and that was a mixture of like, I think there was like 5 Goot loaded in there, 3 Cobalt Strikes, like 7 Raspberry Robins, some other stuff. Yeah, it's a mixture. I'd say the strain of malware that's being used, like changes of, it's kind of fashionable. You have threat actors who know what they're doing and they repeat it and they just change like their initial access tactics, but not too much else. But yeah, I would say on the whole, it doesn't necessarily matter what the malware is initially. If you can pick up the initial access techniques and the enumeration after that, that's where you need to be clued in on, because kind of the malware is going to change, the infection method is going to change, but the behavior post initial infection will remain reasonably similar. If you're looking at ATPs and stuff, I'll be honest, you need to be a lot more clued in. You need to be paying a lot more money. You need to understand exactly what's going on, because ATPs are not going to be like, let me just run who am I / like everything, let me just be really noisy. They're going to be a lot quieter, and they're going to probably be a lot more stealthy. So you're going to need to invest a lot more effort into custom detection, so things that you actually know what's happening in your environment, like what the standard behavior is that vendors won't even look at. Yeah, and pay people a lot of money who know what they're doing to catch them, really. So they're a different ballpark. But yeah, the classic stuff, I think, regardless of the malware that you're concerned about necessarily, as long as you understand the lateral movement, initial access pieces, you should be good. 1 second, there was someone in the middle, sorry.
On the graph that you showed,
Yes.
the mean time to respond, was about the same for the 2 companies, but one obviously more urgent?
Yes.
Do you have a preference of which?
I don't think it matters. I think you need to understand underneath why that's happening. So the second company, they were really fast at acknowledging because they had an SLA to acknowledge within a time frame. But the first company didn't have that SLA, so they're spending 8 minutes to investigate. What I would take away from that, if I was the customer of that managed service, I would say, how much value am I getting from 8 minutes of investigation time? Like, are you able to do your job in 8 minutes? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe your tools are really good and they tell you exactly what's happening. I would be hesitant to that. I'd say an investigation ballpark range, like to understand what's happening and to take remediating activities, it's probably like 20 to 30 minutes is where I ballpark it at for your average analyst. That's what you want to be looking at. If you're measuring managed service providers, I'd look at the performance within the SLA, not if they're meeting or missing their SLAs. So like how close to the SLA are they actually? That's where you want to be measuring, because that will show you kind of if they're fudging the numbers a little bit, or they're not actually prioritizing you as much as you think they are. Sorry, you're on the right.
So with those MTT, we call it mean time to triage.
Yeah.
In terms of like if you're assigning the investigation and the response, at what point do you close that? First of all, are all of those true positives, i.e. incidents? Do you include metrics around alerts and closures that are false positives as part of that? Second part of that is at what stage during the incident response process would you close that as responded to?
So, yeah, really good questions. So those stats are all-inclusive, false positives, true positives, whatever other markings you have, benign, true positive, etc. Depends on your company and how many closing tickets you have for them. But yeah, that's total. I think you should take it total, because if you only look at your true positives, that's when, in theory, your A team should be on it and looking at it, right? So they should have better numbers, but you want the true picture of what your team is performing at. And then your second question, sorry, I have forgotten.
The second question is, at what stage during the incident response cycle would you close
Oh, cool, yeah. So from a threat mitigation perspective, so we're not fixing the whole incident, we're just kicking out the threat actor, slapping on that flex tape, and then saying jobs are good. And basically, as soon as you've isolated and contained the devices that have been compromised, you've evicted the threat actor from like any accounts they've added from a persistence method or the accounts that they've compromised initially, and you're like happy that the threat actor is no longer in your surface area, they're no longer in your environment. That's where I would say that incident is then closed from your like direct SOC team's perspective. Actual remediation activity, like how long does it take you to bring back the systems and all sorts of other stuff like that, you should measure that, you should be tracking that, but I think that's a different, it should be like a different measurement, it should be a different team that you're looking at for that. You can, I'm happy to argue with that. That is purely debatable. Some teams have all in one. Any other questions? Cool, all right, well, upstairs, there's a booth, so I'll be there if you do want to have a chat, not with tens of people, and then, yeah, you can reach out to me there.